Steven Seagal, the man who never bled, the warrior who never lost. Hollywood called him invincible, but behind that calm, behind that silence, was a man fighting battles no camera ever saw. He rose like thunder and vanished like smoke. No scandal, no farewell, just a legend fading into his own silence. And this is the untold story of the man behind the myth. Hollywood loved its warriors, men who could walk through fire and emerge untouched. But Steven Seagal was different. He didn't just play the part of a warrior, he became one. With his black coat flowing like a shadow and his quiet, deliberate steps, he wasn't the kind of hero who shouted. He was the storm that came without warning. The silence before the strike. For millions of fans, he was the definition of strength. The man who never missed, never doubted, never fell. In a world addicted to explosions and chaos, Seagal was ice-calm, precise, unshakable. Every glance carried a promise, justice without mercy. He didn't need to talk. His silence was the dialogue. His eyes were colder than bullets, his movements smoother than wind. But what no one saw, not the audience, not the producers, not even the people closest to him, was that every punch he threw on screen came from a wound he carried off it. Behind that face of unbreakable control was a boy who had once been fragile, weak, and painfully human. The invincible Steven Seagal was not born in strength. He was built from fear, loneliness, and the need to never be powerless again. Fame arrived like a tidal wave, and he surfed it with the same composure that made him a star. The headlines called him the next Eastwood, the silent killer, the new kind of American hero. But with every headline came another layer of armor, another piece of the mask. Soon it wasn't Steven anymore, it was the legend. And legends don't cry. They don't hurt. They don't grow old. He had mastered the art of looking untouchable, even when life kept proving otherwise. The divorces, the betrayals, the critics who once cheered and then turned on him, all became just background noise to the man who refused to flinch. But even warriors grow tired. Behind the tinted glasses and the carefully measured words was a man terrified of being ordinary again. Terrified that once the mask cracked, no one would want to see what was underneath. There were nights when he stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. The black belt, the fame, the power, all still there. But the eyes staring back at him weren't the same. They carried something else: regret. A quiet awareness that the thing he had built to protect himself had slowly taken his place. The myth had eaten the man. Before the black belts, before the fame, before Hollywood built his myth, there was a small, fragile boy who could barely breathe. Steven Seagal wasn't born with strength. He was born with weakness. Chronic asthma, fragile bones, and nights filled with the sound of wheezing lungs. Every breath was a small victory. Every step a quiet act of defiance against the body that seemed determined to betray him. He spent much of his childhood indoors, watching the world through windows instead of living in it. While other kids played ball or ran through the streets, Steven sat in silence, listening to his own breathing. Sometimes shallow, sometimes ragged. And in that silence, something began to grow: a will. Not the kind that comes from confidence, but from necessity. He wanted to survive. He had to. His parents, ordinary and hardworking, saw the fear in his eyes, but didn't know how to help. They loved him, but love couldn't stop the nights when his chest tightened so hard it felt like drowning. Those moments taught him early what many never learn: that pain can be a teacher, and weakness can be a weapon if you learn how to hold it. The world told him he was fragile, so he made a vow to never be fragile again. He began to seek something, though he couldn't yet name it. Discipline, strength, control. Somewhere deep inside, he believed that if he could control his body, maybe he could also control his life. Martial arts entered his world like a revelation. The first time he watched an Aikido demonstration, he saw something he'd never seen before. Power, without brutality motion, without anger. The idea that you could redirect an attack instead of meeting it with violence fascinated him. It was philosophy disguised as combat, and for a boy who had felt powerless all his life, that philosophy became a lifeline. He started training with quiet obsession. Every bruise became proof that he was changing. Every ache was a victory. His lungs still betrayed him, but his will didn't. The dojo became his temple, the mat his battlefield. The boy who once fought for air was now fighting for mastery. But what drove him wasn't glory, it was fear. Fear of going back to that fragile child gasping for breath in the dark. Fear of being small again. Every punch, every fall, every throw was a way to silence that ghost. He didn't train to win medals. He trained to erase the memory of helplessness. He was 22 when he left America. A young man with fire in his veins and something to prove. The world he grew up in had given him only fragments of belonging, so he went searching for a place where strength was not measured by words, but by silence, and found it in Japan. In Osaka, he was no longer Steven Seagal, the promising martial artist. He was just another foreigner, a gaijin, a stranger in a world built on centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and unspoken rules. Here respect wasn't demanded. It was earned through sweat, humility, and endless repetition. And for a man who had spent his life fighting weakness, it was like learning to walk again. The first days in the dojo were brutal. His American confidence meant nothing. His techniques polished back home looked crude here. The Japanese students, disciplined, precise, and relentless, showed no mercy. When he made mistakes, they threw him harder. When he tried to prove himself, they made him start again. Every movement was a test of patience. Every bow, every correction, a reminder that mastery begins with surrender. He was bruised daily, his pride shattered repeatedly, yet he stayed. He learned the rhythm of the tatami, the sound of feet sliding in unison, the breath that preceded each throw, the quiet respect that followed a clean technique. Slowly, Japan began to change him. The pain no longer felt like punishment. It felt like dialogue. The body spoke, and the spirit listened. Outside, the dojo life was equally hard. He rented a small apartment in a narrow street that smelled of soy rain and neon. The neighbors stared, children whispered, and the language felt like a wall made of sound. There were nights when he sat alone on the tatami floor, staring at his calloused hands, wondering if he had made a mistake. But every morning before dawn, he was back on the mat. The masters began to notice, not because he was strong, but because he was still there. When others gave up, he remained. When he fell, he bowed. When he succeeded, he thanked. There was something unspoken in the way he moved, a mix of American defiance and Japanese precision. The foreigner, who once seemed out of place, had become part of the rhythm. He married a Japanese woman, Miyako Fujitani, the daughter of an Aikido master, and inherited a responsibility greater than himself: teaching, passing on what he had learned not just about combat, but about restraint, respect, and balance. In a small dojo in Osaka, the fragile boy from Michigan had become sensei. He never planned to become a movie star. In truth, Hollywood wasn't even part of his dream. Steven Seagal returned to America not as a performer, but as a teacher, a master of Aikido who had learned to move like water and think like stillness. Yet destiny, as it often does, has a strange sense of irony. When Seagal opened his dojo in Los Angeles, the air inside was different from Osaka, louder, faster, more transactional. But his movements carried a kind of magnetism that no one could imitate. It wasn't just martial arts. It was theater without acting. The students who came to learn from him didn't realize they were watching a performance. The quiet precision, the subtle control, the way he seemed untouchable, it drew people in. Word spread. Soon, actors, producers, even bodyguards of celebrities came through his doors. One of them, impressed by Seagal's energy and authenticity, decided to bring him to the screen. At first, Seagal resisted. He wasn't an actor. He was a practitioner, a philosopher of movement. But the producer insisted the world needed to see this kind of power, this kind of calm. So reluctantly, Seagal agreed. And with that, the legend was born. In 1988, Above the Law hit theaters. Hollywood had never seen anything like it. While other action heroes shouted and exploded across the screen, Seagal stood still. While others threw punches, he redirected them. His enemies seemed to collapse around him, as if gravity itself bent to his will. There was no need for fancy choreography or overacting. His power was simplicity. And that simplicity became mesmerizing. Audiences were stunned. Who was this man? This quiet storm in human form. Overnight, Seagal became a sensation not through words, but through presence. His face unflinching, his movements deliberate, his silence louder than any scream. But fame came with its own traps. The man who once valued humility was now surrounded by noise agents, scripts, interviews, cameras. The world wanted him to talk, to explain, to sell. Yet Seagal had nothing to say. His whole life had been about control, restraint, silence. And now the same silence that defined his art was mistaken for arrogance. He hated the circus of fame, the false smiles, the endless self-promotion. In Japan, a master was respected for his discipline. In Hollywood, respect came from numbers, headlines, and ego. And though Seagal's films Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, Under Siege made millions, each success pushed him further away from the man he once was. Fame came suddenly like a flood, breaking through every wall he had built around himself. Overnight, Steven Seagal was no longer just a man. He was a phenomenon. Posters bearing his face filled theaters. His name became shorthand for power. And yet inside he felt smaller than ever. The same silence that once gave him mystery now became isolation. The same discipline that made him admirable now made him distant. Everywhere he went, eyes followed hands, reached, voices demanded. People wanted a piece of the legend, not the man. And the man had no idea how to exist without the legend. Fame at first felt like justice, a reward for years of struggle. For nights spent in pain and self-doubt. But like most rewards in Hollywood, it came with a hidden cost. The applause was intoxicating, but when it faded, the silence returned, heavier. Lonelier, more suffocating than before. He had climbed to the top only to discover there was no air up there. Behind the cameras, the people closest to him began to feel the distance. Friends became employees. Students became admirers. Conversations turned into interviews. Fame didn't just change his world, it erased the parts that made it real. He was surrounded by people who agreed with everything he said, but no one who truly listened. And in that kind of loneliness, a man begins to forget who he is. He tried to fill the void with work, more movies, more scripts, bigger stunts, higher paychecks, but each success only deepened the emptiness. The more he achieved, the less it meant. He had mastered control on screen, but off-screen life was unraveling quietly. His first marriage fell apart, swallowed by distance and ambition. The family that once grounded him now saw only a shadow passing through. Hollywood adored him, but it didn't understand him. It never would. It took his stoic calm and turned it into marketing. It took his moral philosophy and repackaged it as entertainment. To them, Seagal wasn't a man of discipline, he was a brand. And when a brand begins to fade, Hollywood doesn't heal it. It replaces it. The tabloids began to whisper about arrogance, about temper, about ego. Some of it true, most of it cruel. The more he tried to stay quiet, the louder the noise grew. The more he tried to defend himself, the more misunderstood he became. Fame had turned into a mirror that showed him only distortion. He started noticing the little betrayals, friends who vanished when the spotlight dimmed, promises broken by people who had once sworn loyalty. Even those who loved him began to walk carefully, afraid of his moods, his intensity, his silence. For years, Steven Seagal had been the embodiment of certainty, the man who never missed, never hesitated, never lost. But the thing about control is that it cannot last forever. One wrong decision, one moment of pride, one storm you didn't see coming, and everything starts to unravel. The first crack appeared where he least expected it, in his art. The film that was supposed to redeem him, to prove that he could still command the screen, failed. The reviews were merciless. Critics who once praised his stillness now called him stiff. His calm was no longer mystique, it was labeled boredom. His silence, once power, was dismissed as emptiness. Hollywood had moved on. New faces, new heroes, new energy. The audience that once worshipped him had found others to adore. The man who had defined an era of action cinema now stood at the edge of its fading light. And as the world turned away, so did his allies. Executives stopped calling. Studios hesitated. Invitations grew fewer. For the first time in decades, Seagal faced what he feared most: irrelevance. But the collapse wasn't just professional, it was personal. The world he built, the houses, the cars, the adoration began to feel like hollow trophies. His marriages, already strained by distance and fame, began to crumble one after another. What was once love had turned into quiet disappointment. The man who could command a crowd couldn't hold a family together. The walls of his empire began to echo with silence, not the meditative stillness of his youth, but the kind that comes when there's no one left to listen. Friends disappeared. Children grew up, partners left. He was surrounded by luxury, yet lonelier than he had ever been in Osaka, sleeping on a tatami mat and dreaming of greatness. He tried to fight back the only way he knew how, by working harder. More projects, more appearances, more comebacks, but each effort seemed to dig him deeper into the same hole. The public, once fascinated by his strength, now mocked his excess. The internet, that cruel new stage, turned his legend into memes, his mystique into parody. The hero who never lost on screen was now losing in real life, slowly, quietly, invisibly. And yet Seagal never showed defeat. He couldn't. The mask of invincibility, forged in childhood and polished by fame, would not let him break. In interviews, he smiled. In public, he bowed. He spoke of loyalty, of peace, of spiritual balance. But behind the calm exterior was a man drowning in memories of who he once was and who he could no longer be. Steven Seagal had lived many lives: the warrior, the master, the movie star, the exile. But beneath all the titles was one man trying to hold together what fame had quietly taken from him: family. He was married 3 times, 3 different women, 3 different worlds. Each one entered his life when he was standing at a crossroads, and each time he believed love might save him. But love, like fame, does not thrive in silence. His first marriage began in Japan. Miyako, the graceful daughter of a martial arts master. She had seen him rise from student to sensei, from an eager young man to a disciplined teacher. Together, they shared not just love, but purpose. 2 children, a shared dojo, a future built on movement and respect. But when Hollywood came calling, that future fractured. Fame demanded more than his time. It demanded his presence, his soul. And the man who had once bowed to tradition now bowed to the camera. He told himself it was temporary, that success would make everything better. But distance has a way of killing even the strongest bonds. While Seagal was filming under bright lights, his children were growing up under the dim glow of memory. He missed birthdays, first steps, quiet dinners. And when he finally looked up from the screen, the family he left behind was already gone. His second marriage to Adrienne LaRussa came and went like a storm. Brief, chaotic, passionate, and painful. It ended before it truly began another chapter, written in the rush of confusion that fame brings. The tabloids turned it into spectacle. Seagal turned it into silence. Then came Kelly LeBrock, the woman the world knew as a goddess, the face of perfection. Together, they seemed untouchable, the action hero, and the model beauty and strength, Hollywood's golden couple. But perfection is heavy to carry, and behind the photos was a marriage haunted by absence. Kelly loved the man, but she lived with the myth. The same mask that fascinated the world stood between them, keeping him safe and alone. They had 3 children together, 3 small souls who wanted a father, not a legend. But Seagal didn't know how to be both. He tried between sets, between interviews, to be present, to laugh, to listen. Yet even in those moments, his mind drifted somewhere else. Perhaps back to the dojo, where life had been simpler. Perhaps to the boy he once was, the one still gasping for air in the dark. When the marriage finally broke, he didn't shout, didn't fight. He simply retreated, as he always did. Another house emptied, another chapter closed. When the applause faded and the cameras turned away, Steven Seagal found himself surrounded by something he hadn't known in decades: silence. Not the disciplined silence of a dojo or the meditative quiet of Japan, but the hollow silence of emptiness. No producers, no scripts, no expectations. Just a man alone with the sound of his own thoughts. It was then that he turned to music not as a career, not even as escape, but as confession. For years, Seagal had spoken with movement, with stillness, with control. Now, for the first time, he wanted to speak with vulnerability. He wanted people to hear the man behind the myth. The blues called to him, not because it was fashionable, but because it spoke his language: sorrow, dressed in melody, pain, turned into rhythm. He picked up a guitar and played like he fought with precision, with silence between every note. His voice, deep and untrained, carried something raw. The sound of someone who had seen too much, felt too little, and still tried to reach for redemption. In 2005, he released Songs from the Crystal Cave, a strange fusion of blues soul and Eastern philosophy. It wasn't perfect. Critics mocked it, calling it vanity, an aging actor's attempt to stay relevant. But they missed the point. For Seagal, the album wasn't a performance, it was a confession. Every lyric was a fragment of truth, hidden behind metaphor. The songs spoke of honor, love, betrayal, and spiritual yearning. They weren't meant to entertain. They were meant to explain to the world, and maybe to himself, that behind the martial arts master and the movie hero was a man who had simply run out of ways to be strong. He played in small venues away from the Hollywood spotlight, performing to crowds that came out of curiosity more than devotion. But when the lights dimmed and he strummed the first chord, something real happened. For a few fleeting moments, the mask slipped. The warrior disappeared, And what remained was just Steven Seagal, aging human. Those close to him said that music softened him. He laughed more. He spoke more freely. But beneath the surface, the same ache remained, the feeling of being unheard, unseen, misunderstood. No matter how honest the songs, no matter how heartfelt the performances, the world refused to listen. They wanted the fighter, not the musician. The hero, not the man. It's a cruel irony. The more Seagal tried to show his truth, the less the world wanted it. The myth had long ago replaced the man, and now when he tried to step out from behind it, no one recognized him. There was a time when Steven Seagal's name meant money, when every punch translated into millions, every film into global success. He lived like the warrior king. Hollywood had created mansions in Los Angeles, cars lined like soldiers' properties scattered across continents. Wealth flowed easily, and with it came power. But like all illusions, it didn't last. Fame had made him a millionaire. Time made him human again. The fall was not sudden, not dramatic. It was quiet, the way all real endings are. Contracts dried up. Studios moved on. Projects stalled, then disappeared. The action genre had evolved, and Seagal, once the vanguard of its discipline and minimalism, now seemed like a relic of a different era. The younger actors were faster, louder, more marketable. They did their own stunts, smiled for the press, and played the Hollywood game he always despised. Meanwhile, Seagal stayed silent. He refused to chase trends, refused to change the formula that had once made him immortal. But in refusing to adapt, he sealed his fate. As offers disappeared, so did income. The mansions that once symbolized victory became burdens. Taxes, debts, maintenance, the empire of a legend slowly turned into a cage. He began selling properties, downsizing, retreating further into isolation. The media, always hungry for a fallen idol, circled like vultures. Tabloids called him washed-up delusional, a ghost of the past. The same cameras that once glorified his silence now mocked it. The same journalists who once quoted his philosophies now twisted them into jokes. And the worst part, he couldn't defend himself, because in the public eye, silence means guilt. He had spent a lifetime mastering control, but no control could stop perception. He watched his own image, the face of strength, become meme caricature, internet fodder. The myth of invincibility had decayed into parody. The warrior had become a punchline. For a man who built his life on discipline, this kind of humiliation was unbearable. Those who knew him during this time described a strange transformation. His body heavier, his movements slower, his eyes dimmer. The years of physical strain, stunts, and fights had left their toll. His joints ached, his reflexes dulled. The man who once embodied balance now struggled simply to stay upright. But it wasn't just the body that changed. It was the spirit. The same stillness that once made him magnetic now looked like emptiness. He spoke less, appeared less, and when he did, people hardly recognized the man he had been. There comes a time in every warrior's life when the battle is no longer out there, it's inside. By the time Steven Seagal met Ella, the storms had passed. The crowds were gone. The critics had stopped writing. The headlines had stopped screaming. What remained was silence, and in that silence she appeared. Ella wasn't from Hollywood. She wasn't a star or a producer or part of the noise. She was simple, calm, and kind. A light that didn't demand attention. To a man who had spent decades surrounded by people who wanted something from him, her presence was disarming. She didn't care about fame. She cared about peace. For the first time in years, Seagal allowed himself to be still without the need to perform. There were no scripts, no interviews, no need to be strong. With Ella, he didn't have to be Steven Seagal, the legend. He could simply be Steven, flawed, older, slower, but still capable of love. Together, they built a quiet life far from Los Angeles, far from the red carpets and the endless expectations. Their home was simple, a fortress not of stone, but of calm. A few close friends, a handful of animals, and the sound of guitars filling the air instead of applause. When their youngest child was born, something in Seagal softened. The man who had missed so many moments with his older children now lingered. He learned to be present, truly present. The morning coffee, the laughter of a child, the weight of small hands clutching his arm, these became his new victories. He often said in interviews during this time, "I've lived too long in front of cameras. Now I just want to live." It wasn't bitterness, but realization. Fame had been his illusion. Family was his truth. Ella became his compass, not by changing him, but by grounding him. She didn't try to fix his past. She simply accepted it. And in that acceptance, he found something he hadn't known since Japan: peace through humility. For decades, Steven Seagal's body had been his temple, his weapon, his identity, his proof that willpower could conquer anything. He had thrown men twice his size broken bones without flinching, performed stunts most wouldn't dare attempt. But now, in the quiet stillness of his later years, that same body began to rebel. It started subtly, a stiffness in the mornings, a slow recovery from minor injuries. Then came the pain in his knees, his hips, his hands. The same joints that once flowed with precision now protested with every movement. Each step became a negotiation, each stretch a reminder that strength has an expiration date. He had built his legend on control over the enemy, control over chaos, control over pain. But you cannot throw time. You cannot redirect age. For the first time in his life, Seagal's body stopped obeying him. Doctors told him to slow down, to rest, to accept that the body he had trained to perfection was simply wearing out. But Seagal didn't know how to slow down. He had spent his entire life pushing through pain, fatigue, rejection. To him, giving up motion felt like surrender. So he resisted. He trained. He stretched. He pretended not to notice when his body trembled or his breath shortened. But pain has patience. It waits. And it always collects its debt. He began walking with more caution. His once fluid movements now measured, deliberate. On rare public appearances, fans noticed it: the slower stride, the heavier frame, the fatigue behind the glasses. Yet even then, he refused pity. When asked about his health, he would smile and say, "The warrior's path never ends. It just changes pace." Privately, though, the struggle was brutal. For a man who had built his entire sense of self around mastery of the body, to lose that mastery was like losing identity. Each day became a quiet battle, not against others, but against his own reflection. There were moments of quiet grief, times when he would watch old clips of himself, the swift throws, the effortless control, and sit in silence, caught between pride and sorrow. To the world, those scenes were entertainment. To him, they were memories of a man he could no longer be. The Arizona sun doesn't forgive. It burns it, blinds it, bleaches the world into stillness. Maybe that's why Steven Seagal chose it. The silence, the emptiness, the endless horizon that mirrored his own life. Far from Hollywood, far from Japan, far from the noise of both admiration and mockery, he built his final refuge, a vast estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. High walls, bulletproof windows, heavy wooden doors that shut with a finality only a man tired of the world could love. Inside, everything had purpose stone floors, samurai armor, antique swords lining the walls, statues of Buddha and Guan Yin watching from corners. The house was not designed for comfort. It was designed for control. To visitors, it felt like a museum of contradictions. A blend of east and west, of war and peace. To Seagal, it was a reflection, a place where every object told a story. Every wall carried a memory. The katana above the fireplace wasn't decoration. It was a relic of the man he once was. The Aikido mats in the private dojo weren't nostalgia. They were a ritual, a reminder that he could still move, still breathe, still exist. He called it his sanctuary, but sometimes it felt more like a prison. Days bled into nights in quiet repetition. He woke early, drank tea, fed his animals, trained slowly in the courtyard, and played his guitar as the sun sank behind the mountains. There was no schedule, no urgency, no applause. Only rhythm, the kind that comes when life stops demanding and starts forgiving. But even in peace, there were ghosts. The walls were lined with photos, him shaking hands with presidents smiling beside stars, walking red carpets with faces that had long since turned away. Sometimes he'd stop and stare at them, not with vanity, but with disbelief, as if those moments belonged to someone else. In a way, they did. The man in those pictures was younger, lighter, immortal. The man standing before them was slower, heavier, mortal. He kept to himself. The neighbors rarely saw him. When he did appear in town, in a store, or at a local event, he moved with the same slow precision he always had, as if still performing for invisible cameras. The aura of mystery clung to him even when there was no one left to impress. Some say he became paranoid, afraid of betrayal, wary of outsiders. Others say he simply wanted to be left alone to spend the remainder of his days in quiet reflection, free from judgment. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. The mirror never lies. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't forgive it. Only reflects. And for Steven Seagal, each morning's reflection had become a quiet reckoning. He used to look into the mirror and see control, the sharp jawline, the steady gaze, the man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. Now he saw something else, an old warrior wrapped in memory's eyes that still held fire but dimmed at the edges. Every line on his face was a chapter, every scar a sentence. He would stare for long moments, not out of vanity, but disbelief. Was this truly him? The man who once moved like water, who could silence a room with a glance. The world still whispered his name, but rarely with reverence. Online, his image was distorted memes, mockery, exaggeration. The legend had become myth, and the myth had turned into entertainment. It didn't make him angry. It made him quiet, because somewhere deep inside he understood this was the price of surviving your own legend. He had outlived the era that made him famous. The world had changed faster, louder, crueler. Everything that once defined him was now dismissed as outdated. His calm was misread as arrogance, his depth mistaken for delusion. The audience that once saw a master now saw a caricature. But perhaps that was inevitable. In a world obsessed with reinvention, Seagal refused to become someone else. He would rather be misunderstood than false. Some mornings he would find himself standing before that mirror for minutes remembering. The smell of tatami in Osaka, the heat of the lights on a movie set, the sound of applause, the laughter of his children. All of it reflected back at him in fragments, like a life seen through cracked glass. He no longer wore the black belts proudly displayed on his wall. They were symbols of a past life, not trophies. He had learned the hardest lesson of mastery, that the ultimate goal of discipline isn't dominance, but acceptance. And yet acceptance is harder than any fight. There were days when the weight of memory pressed too hard. When he'd run a hand through his thinning hair, trace the lines of his face, and wonder how much of himself was still there beneath the legend. Was the quiet strength still real, or just habit? Was the peace he claimed truly peace, or resignation? Loss had followed Steven Seagal like a shadow, silent patient, inevitable. He had lost fortunes, families, friends, and fame. But as the years stretched on, he began to understand that loss wasn't punishment. It was purification. In the beginning, he fought every loss like an enemy denying, resisting, trying to rebuild what had already burned down. But as time wore him down, something shifted. He stopped fighting. He started counting not what was gone, but what was left. And what remained surprised him. There was his wife Ella, steady, unshaken, the quiet companion who had never asked him to be more than what he was. In her eyes, he wasn't the forgotten movie star or the mythic warrior. He was simply the man she loved. No masks, no perfection, just presence. There was his youngest child, curious, bright, free from the weight of his past. When they laughed together, Seagal felt something he hadn't felt since his early days in Japan innocence. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was real. There was his guitar, the one instrument that had never betrayed him. When the world stopped listening, he still played. Each note was a small conversation with himself. Music had once been his attempt to speak to others. Now it was prayer, not for redemption, but for calm. And then there was something deeper, something less visible, but more enduring: his will. The same stubborn flame that carried him from a sickly child gasping for air to a global icon still burned, even if dimly. Time had bent him, but it had not broken him. In his fortress, the walls still whispered the echoes of his life. Posters from Under Siege and Hard to Kill hung beside Japanese scrolls of peace and balance, a strange collage of violence and serenity. The story of a man who spent his life trying to reconcile both. Sometimes he would walk through those halls, slowly touching the edges of frames, running his hand over the cold steel of the swords he once trained with. They were relics now heavy with memory, light with meaning. He no longer saw them as weapons. They were symbols of survival. He had lost much, too much perhaps, but in losing everything he found clarity. The fame, the adoration, the wealth, all of it had been noise. What mattered, what truly remained, were the moments of stillness, the rare fragments of connection, the quiet truth that even legends are made of flesh and fear. Some legends end in tragedy, others end in silence. Steven Seagal's story ended somewhere in between, a slow fading, not a fall. He didn't die young like so many of his peers. There was no final curtain, no funeral, no viral goodbye. Instead, he simply drifted away, quietly, deliberately, as if walking off the set of his own life. To most, he vanished. To himself, he finally arrived. He still walks the desert roads of Arizona sometimes, under skies so wide they could swallow sound. Locals say they see him, a tall, broad figure in black, moving slowly, calmly, like a ghost of a time the world has forgotten. He nods politely, speaks softly, and leaves before anyone can ask for proof. Because what proof could there be? The man the world once knew. The invincible fighter, the stoic star, the Hollywood samurai no longer exists. What remains is the quiet man who outlived his own myth and learned how to make peace with the silence that fame left behind. There is no comeback, no redemption arc, no grand final scene. Just a simple life, a home filled with guitars, Japanese scrolls, and the sound of the wind whispering through the desert. A wife who stayed. A child who still laughs. A man who for the first time no longer needs to win. He once believed survival meant dominance. Now he knows it means endurance. The fortune is gone, the spotlight dimmed, but the flame remains small, steady, stubborn. Because true strength was never in the strike. It was in standing up again and again, even when no one was watching. In the end, Steven Seagal didn't die. He simply stepped out of the frame, leaving behind an echo, a question, a memory. Somewhere in that Arizona silence, an old warrior sits beneath the fading light. The armor is gone. The weapons rest. The legend breathes softly, freely. No longer haunted by applause, no longer chased by ghosts. Just a man, finally still. Subscribe to USA Legends Never Fade. Because behind every headline, behind every fall from grace, there's a human story waiting to be heard. Leave a comment below. What do you remember most about Steven Seagal, the fighter, the actor, or the man behind the silence? And as always, thank you for listening, for remembering, and for keeping the light of forgotten legends alive.